Hey everyone, it was round 6 of the 2020 FIDE Candidates Tournament today, and the leader, Ra1 Nepomniachtchi, was playing Ding Liren. Now Nepo has been playing some good chess recently, and Ding, even though he lost the first 2 rounds, was slowly getting into the tournament. And also Nepomniachtchi was winning at the moment with 3.5 out of 5. Maybe it comes at a good time to play Ding at this moment. So anyway, Nepomniachtchi is playing white in this game. Ding Liren was playing black. And the game began with e4, e5, knight to f3, knight c6, bishop b5, so we get a Ruy Lopez with a6 from Ding. The bishop goes back to a3, and then there was knight to f6. Are we going to get a Berlin after castles? Well no, this time Ding plays bishop to e7, Jan plays d3 supporting his e4 pawn, there was a b5, bishop b3, and then d6. And this is all standard stuff that we've seen before. And now there's 3 moves that are typically played for white here. I usually play c3, which gives the bishop a cover square, jumping into c2 if the knight ever goes to a5. There's also a4 here, which is a potential candidate move, attacking the b5 pawn. And again, it stops the knight jumping into a5 as well. But this time Nepomniachtchi played a3, so giving their bishop a safety square to a2 when black plays knight to a5. But Ding castled first, knight c3 was played, knight a5, so hitting the bishop. There's one key square, so bishop a2, which is the safety square, and now black plays bishop to e6, once again trying to trade off their so-called bad bishop anyway for their white's good bishop here. So the white squared Ruy Lopez bishop is incredibly strong in these games, so black tends to try and trade it off. Nepo played b4, hits the knight on a5, but first Ding wants to get rid of this bishop, so bishop takes a2. And unfortunately for white, they can't play an intermezzo move like pawn takes knight here, because after just bishop e6, they're left with 2 double A pawns, and this is a terrible structure for white. So after bishop takes a2, obviously white will just recapture. So rook takes a2, and now the threat is realised with the b pawn attacking the knight on a5, which Ding drops back to c6, and Nepo develops his last piece, bishop to g5, a good square for the bishop, pinning the knight, and Ding plays queen to d7. And this is all standard stuff actually, it's been played multiple times by top grandmasters. And Nepo goes in for this variation now, getting rid of this knight. Bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6. So the knight is no longer on f6 covering this d5 square. And this leaves white free to play knight to d5. So it's very rare that actually white or any grandmaster would give up their 2 bishops and remain with the 2 knights. However, it makes perfect sense in this position because the centre is locked down, and now this knight does a great job of attacking the bishop on f6, but also protects their b4 pawn, leaving the a pawn free to roam up the board with the safety of this knight in the centre. So maybe knight takes f6 is quite a big threat here. Typically some games have gone bishop d8 straight away, and white continues with a4. Once again, this knight on d5 protects the pawn on b4. And if black goes knight to e7, then white can just retreat the knight back to e3. And white's got quite a good game. For instance, if pawn takes a4 here, thinking they've won a pawn, just queen a1 by white, and they'll regain that a pawn with ease because they've created a great battery. And white's now maybe going to play moves like c4 here and just completely dominate the centre. After knight to e3 in this variation, c6 may also be played. But then after a takes b5, pawn takes, and then c4 again. Again, white's got a very nice position, preparing to play c5, and I think we'd all agree that maybe white's got a slight edge in this position. It's certainly got a good space advantage, and black's pieces are quite clumsily placed in this variation. But after knight d5, I think Ding played more actively, which is probably best. He played a5 instead, which is quite interesting. So now white could consider to double black's pawns if they wish. Knight takes f6, pawn takes f6, and the computer actually gives rook a1 as the best move here, which I'm not so sure about. Because after pawn takes pawn, rook takes rook and queen takes, black can win a pawn with knight takes b4. After queen b2, black can play c5, and the computer really likes knight h4 and d5, so I'm not really sure. White's actually a pawn down here. That counts for quite a lot in this sort of position. So I'm not entirely sure what's going on. But like in the game, maybe rook b2 is possible in this variation, and after pawn takes, black can still play d5, but at least white isn't a complete pawn down. Saying that though, after a5, it looks as though this knight takes f6 doesn't offer white anything. So Jan decided to play rook b2. So after pawn takes pawn now, pawn takes pawn, the rook on b2 does a great job of just defending this b4 pawn, and there's no trade of rooks as of yet. But you could say this rook is ahead of its time. Basically White's plan is to just play c4 and use this b pawn to batter down the board. So now Ding was careful, he played bishop d8, he doesn't want to double his f pawns, which makes a lot of sense. But now Jan played c4, so getting on with his plan, basically the threat is c takes b5 now, and black has to do something about it. If pawn takes c4 here, then I think white will just recapture, and again the threatening to play b5. And there's not that many good moves that black can play here. I looked at knight to e7 because it looks like the logical place to put your knights, but now white has a sneaky trick with knight takes e5, winning a pawn. Because if black takes this, then there's knight to f6 with a discovered attack against the queen on d7. After pawn takes knight, queen takes d7, white's just in an absolutely won position. So perhaps instead of knight to e7, black can maybe play queen g4 first, attacking this e4 pawn. After rook e1 to protect the pawn, now play knight to e7 because there's no longer any discovered attack. But still, white could play h3, attacking the queen, and now gives white also a cover square for the king to avoid back rank ideas. After queen e6, just play knight to e3. And I'm put a note here that said really like white's position, mainly because this bishop on d8 is really suffocated. Okay, maybe black can play c5 or something, but then b5 will just launch up the board. So it's not so easy for black here. So like I say, it's very tricky for black to play, and I think Ding did play a good move. He played knight to d4, getting his knight in the centre. Nepo captured this, and the pawn recaptured. And then he played queen c2. So maybe threatening ideas of queen takes c7, but I don't think it quite works yet, because if black just plays a nothing move like h6 here, and c takes b5, queen takes b5, I don't think knight takes c7 works just yet, because bishop takes, queen takes d3. If we play b5, this queen takes e4, b6, and now it's considered dead equal, mainly because the two rooks can just come to b8 and c8 and start harassing this queen. And again, black's actually a pawn up in this position. Okay, it's double pawn, but still, it's not so easy for white to convert this b pawn. In fact, it's probably impossible if they blockade it with one of the rooks. So yeah, I don't think in this position this is actually a real threat, but I'll just put the arrows there anyway. So Ding played rook to e8 here, and Nepo played g3. So again, this is quite a nice move because it sort of limits black's bishop, covers the h4 square, the f4 square, could threaten to play f4, or even just put the knight onto f4 and back to g2 if the knight becomes under threat. For instance, if c6, then knight comes back to f4. If g5, then the knight can drop back to e2 and attack this pawn on d4. If black takes on c4 in this variation, then queen takes c4 seems to be okay for white. But after bishop f6 in this variation, white has to be a bit careful because this leads to a trap. If knight takes d4, then d5 takes actually wins a piece for black. Just because the queen has to protect this knight, let's say queen c3, and then of course there's just moves like queen g4, and that'll pick up the knight because it's pinned. So after bishop f6 in this variation, f4 is actually quite a good move. And if g4, there's rook c2, rook to b8, and this is considered dead equal. So maybe Ding should have played c6 here. It's perfectly possible. But he took on c4 though, b takes c4, Jan captured, queen takes c4, maybe now threatening to play queen takes d4 perhaps. But Ding played c6, hitting the knight, which drops back to knight f4. Then there's bishop g5, attacking the knight, and it jumps back to e2, threatening to play knight takes d4. And we're into a similar position as that variation we just covered, because after d5, takes, and queen b3. Obviously if this knight ever tries to take on d4, black has bishop f6, but I don't think Jan's ever going to do that. But now he's got this b pawn. The queen and the rook are right behind it, and it's ready to launch down the board. So black's got to be very active here and watch out for this. And to be fair to Ding, he actually played a really good move here, h5. Threatening to play h4. And it's really good because if white now plays h4, which I think many of us actually would, attacking the bishop, black's got a great sacrifice, just bishop takes h4. And if the pawn takes it, there's rook takes e2. Rook takes e2 with queen g4 at the end of it with check. King h2, queen takes the pawn with check. king g2, queen g4, king h2, and queen takes e2, and black's actually in a better position now. So h5 was actually a really good move here, but unfortunately Nepo is a really strong player. He's not your average 2000 player. He plays b5, so he's just pushing his advantage home here, trying to get another queen, or at least launching it far down the board to put black in a lot of problems. So Ding continues also with h4, and again Nepo just ignores this, b6, and did the right thing because taking this pawn would be suicide. So it's better to just push the pawn down the board and maintain your advantage. I now think Ding's at a crossroads. I looked at this position and I think it's time that black actually said, okay, you've pushed this b pawn far enough, and put queen b7 on the board to stop it rolling down. And if play continues rook f b1, maybe black can play rook e6. And the point is, after knight takes d4, just play rook to g6, and he may have some counter attack against white's king here, or it could be a bluff. For instance, let's play queen b5, there's h3. Bishop f6 is still on the cards, so white may be forced to play moves like rook to b3. And after bishop d8, queen e8, king h7. This is a computer variation, by the way, in case you couldn't tell. There's queen e2, and finally rook takes b6, queen h5 check, king g8, queen takes h3, rook takes rook, rook takes rook. And I've put here white is better, but black is finally rid of that pesky b pawn. So okay, white's still a pawn up. However, it might be easy to try and draw this game now that the b pawn is off the board. So certainly if we go back to the game, maybe queen b7 was an option for Ding to play here. Instead Ding played h3, which is fair enough. So he's trying to maybe create some mating attacks, which makes perfect sense. But now I think Jan actually played one of the best moves of the game, king h1. And it took me ages to work out what that move was about, but I finally figured out that it's actually just to make some space for your knight to come into g1. And the point is, once the knight's on g1, it threatens the pawn on h3 and also covers this key f3 square as well, so it's a great defensive idea. Ding played rook to b8, so finally has a piece in front of that pesky pawn. And white still has to be a bit careful. For instance, we can't take this pawn again because bishop f6 is on the cards, and if queen b4 to protect the knight, there's rook a4 at the end of it, so white would lose a piece. So instead of picking up pawns, it's important for Jan just to concentrate on this key b pawn. He plays rook f to b1, which is a good move once again, and now there's a triple battery behind it. Bishop d8 was played, so okay, rook takes b6 is threatened. Jan actually comes up with another great move, queen b5. Threatens to attack the queen on d7. I think queen takes queen here would be terrible for black, and white will just hoover up the remaining pawns. So he has to be active and he plays queen to g4. Threatening to play queen to f3 with check and checkmate in 2 moves. And now potentially white may have missed a good win here with queen to a8 check, king h7 and queen takes f7, which covers the f3 square. And if rook takes b6, rook takes b6, bishop takes b6, at the end of this variation f3 looks very nice. So we're attacking the queen on g4 and also this bishop on b6. If queen g5, then I think here white should play knight to f4, attacking h3, still attacking this bishop on b6, and if bishop to d8, just play queen to b7, attacking the rook, rook a2, and then go queen d7. And now white can start hoovering up the h3 pawn and this d5 pawn. Just a quick note in this variation, queen g5, it's important that white doesn't take this b6 bishop off, because then rook a1 check can be played, and if knight g1, there's rook takes the knight, king takes, queen c1, king f2 and queen d2, which would lead to a perpetual check for both sides, and it would be a draw. So queen e8 could have been played by Jan, but he played queen takes d5 instead. A logical move, it just keeps control of all this white square diagonal, so there's nothing wrong with this move though at all. And now Ding played rook to a5, so okay, now the tricks are coming in. Obviously we can't take this rook because his queen takes a5, there's queen f3 check, king g1 and mate. But okay, the computer really likes f3 in this position, again attacking the queen. If rook takes the queen, pawn takes g4, rook b7, knight g1, which is the stockfish way. The point is now we're attacking h3, and if maybe black plays rook g5 here, then just go rook b5, rook takes rook, rook takes rook, rook takes pawn, rook takes, and then bishop takes and play knight takes h3 and just win the endgame. but I actually don't think this is quite easy. Also, for rook d6 in this variation, then knight takes h3 was given, rook takes pawn, rook takes rook, bishop takes, and king g2. Again, white's a pawn up, but is it so easy to win? I'm not so sure. So I think after rook a5 by Ding, f3 is not a very easy move to spot. And I know loads of commentators are now saying white's next move was actually not that good because there's a big sacrifice, which we'll see. So, but anyway, Jan played queen c6. In the game, Ding played rook c5 here, attacking the queen once again with these ideas. But many commentators are now saying rook takes b6 was missed by both sides. And what an amazing move that is, rook takes b6. The point is, if rook takes b6 now, then this queen takes e2. After rook b8, attacking the bishop, black has the amazing move rook e5 and just harassing this bank rank because the pawn is on h3. And even after rook takes d8 though, with check, king h7, again this mating threat is still there, and it's hard to see what white can do. If rook g1 here, then just queen takes f2 will be played, and again this is winning for black because you can play rook e1. Yeah, there's nothing really that white can do. If like queen c1 here, then I think you can just play rook to e2, and white's really struggling to protect this pawn as well now. So basically the variation that goes is rook h8 check, king takes, and now queen c8 check, king h7, queen takes h3 with check, king g6, and now king g1 to stop any f3 ideas, queen takes d3 and then queen g4, king h7. And this should be a draw because both sides have equal pawns and equal material. But again, black does have a passer, so it's not so easy for white. If anyone's going to win this, it's probably black now. So going back to this queen c6, rook takes b6 is an amazing move to find. So I also looked at this queen to e8 variation after king h7, knight g1, and it looks as though maybe white's saving themselves. But black can still play rook takes b2. After rook takes b2, black has the amazing move rook a1. Threatening to play queen f3 checkmate because the knight is pinned. And even if white opts for queen e4 here, swapping queens off, black still wins with bishop to a5. They're going to roll this pawn down the board, and there's no way to stop it. If they play rook b3 here to stop it coming to d3, then black can just play bishop c3, and again there's no way to stop this pawn now. For instance, if g4, just play d3, rook takes bishop and then d2, rook behind the pawn and then just d8 queen, and takes, and again now black's the exchange up. And actually in fact d3 is not even the best move in this position. The best move is actually just play g5 and just make white suffer even more. So that's how good black's position is, you don't even need to rush it. So maybe queen c6 was a mistake, who knows? Rook takes b6 and this rook e5 is very hard to spot. Instead though, Ding played rook c5. It looks like a reasonable move because again if queen takes c5, there's queen f3 check, king g1, queen to g2. However, it looks as though Ding missed this queen e8 check idea. After king h7, just play knight to g1, and all of a sudden white's attacking this h3 pawn, covering the f3 square, and also white's still threatening queen takes f7 as well. And if white ever manages to get this pawn on b7, it's probably lights out for black as well. So in the game now, Ding played rook takes b6. White could have taken on b6 with the rook if they wish, but the better move that was played was queen takes d8. After rook takes b2, rook takes b2, rook c1. Again, it looks as though black's got some threats here, but white just has the nice move queen h4 check, forcing the trade of queens. After rook d1, f3, Ding actually resigned the game right here because they're a whole piece down. For instance, if play continues rook takes d3, white just has knight takes h3, and if rook takes f3 there's knight g5 obviously, so we can't play that. And if play continue with f6, king g2, rook a3, rook b4 attacking the pawn, rook a2 check, the king moves up. If black even starts trying to push his pawn up, we just get behind it. And play will continue, maybe knight to f4 here, and eventually black's going to lose this pawn, and white will just be a pawn and a knight up, and it's an easy win for players of this standard. So this was the final position, and again Nepo plays an absolute blinder. He's a really exciting player, and if he gets into his preparation, he always either seems to come up with a brilliant win or a sad loss. But anyway, in my personal opinion, he's playing very well. He's on 4.5 out of 6 now, leading the tournament. And to be honest, I hope he gets into the World Championship match because I think it would be very entertaining. But anyway, let me know what you think in the comments section. If you haven't already, please do subscribe. And maybe even click the notification button because I do try to post every day. But anyway, hopefully see you in the next video tomorrow for another candidates video.